Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pirate Radio. I am your host who needs no introduction, and tonight is going to be a very interesting episode to say the least. I am joined by Mr. Ken Silva, who literally wrote the book on the Trump Assassination Plots. Um, there it is. I do have a picture. The Trump Assassination Plots and what the investigations missed and why it matters. And foreword is written by shooting survivor Jim Copenhaver, who was there at Butler day of, was wounded, I believe still has a bullet in him. So before we get into that, Ken, I'm a little curious, a little bit of your background, if you don't mind, where you're from, how'd you get into investigative journalism, I guess?
Yeah, sure. Well, I definitely appreciate the interest. So I've been a full-time reporter for almost 15 years. I was born and raised in Medina, Ohio, which is kind of about an hour outside of Cleveland. It's, what start pretty much just Midwest country kid, public school kid. Fell into reporting because my basketball coach was a sports reporter. He helped me get a job covering sports when I was in college. I did that for a while, and I got a full-time job in Oberlin, Ohio, which is like, the college is the big, well-known thing there. So that was kind of an interesting start. That was like 2013, 2012. It was kind of before wokeness had swept over the country, but I got a little bit of a preview of it. Going to student protests where they'd snap their fingers instead of clapping, stuff like that, where I'm like, oh, this is like really weird, but I guess it's just Oberlin. And then, a couple of years later, that's kind of like the cultural norm. So did that for about a year. Saw a job advertisement to work in the Caribbean, ended up doing that, working in the Virgin Islands and then the Cayman Islands for local newspapers, kind of bounced around all throughout my 20s. And I came back to the U.S. in 2021. Yeah, the reason I'm kind of giving you the whole biography is because I didn't go, I was overseas for so long, I kind of missed the Trump era, the first Trump, Russiagate, COVID, January 6th, all these major national stories I missed. So working finally got into national news in 2021. And then when the Trump assassination attempt happened in Butler in 2024, I really wanted to like latch onto it and make that my story since I had missed all the other big ones that happened before. And yeah, 2 years later, we got a book. So I think I've accomplished that.
I would say so, and I didn't have time to read the entire book,
Mhm.
but just I've listened to you on other podcasts. I was able to go over some of the book, just a lot of it to try to just be ready for this. So I guess we'll just start. There's so much leading up to Butler. There's so much the first Trump presidency. There's so much kind of around that summer, with just at that time candidate Trump. There's a lot of myths out there that I think we should probably dispel as far as like the Biden administration having anything to do with trying to assassinate Trump because Jill Biden was, I believe, in Pittsburgh at the time and had a Secret Service detail. That there's these people that say, well, Trump wasn't properly protected because there was too many assets given to the first lady who doesn't require or need Secret Service protection. So, um, am I wrong in saying that that basically is all just false? That's kind of people who just don't like Biden kind of glomming on to something.
It's actually true to a certain extent. I mean, it's the same Pittsburgh Secret Service field office that was handling the protection for Jill Biden in Pittsburgh and Trump out in Butler. So, you've got a limited amount of resources for two major figures. And Jill Biden did have like counter surveillance officers with her who are like plainclothes people who kind of roam around outside of the perimeter. And arguably, those guys could have helped, search for the suspicious person that ended up being the shooter. Um, but was it intentional? Were they setting up Trump? I don't think so. And in fact, Trump did get a lot more resources. He had people from the Buffalo field office go down to Pennsylvania to help out. And he even had Secret Service snipers sent to protect him for actually the first time in history that a non president had Secret Service sniper protection. And they were sent there because the Secret Service had intelligence that Iran was trying to kill Trump, which turned out to be pretty dubious. But he did have some beefed up resources despite Jill Biden being in Pittsburgh, to your point.
Sure. So it's one of those, like, it's not intentional. It's more of just incompetent, almost, in a way that, yeah, it's, if there's 100 Secret Service agents at the Pittsburgh field, and I don't know what the number is, but let's say there's 100, then 50 of them, theoretically went to Jill Biden, and those 50 could have went there. So but it's nothing where it was like, yeah, we're going to take all of these guys, we're going to send them here, and then someone's going to try to off Trump. And it's like, yeah, that's not really, you know, intent has a lot to do with this. And
Yeah.
as far as anyone can tell, the Biden administration had no intent to take out Trump. And it's one of the things that I made the point, kind of, I don't remember if it was night of, day of, whatever, but I made the point that you can basically tell that it wasn't the CIA because Trump's still alive. It's one of those things. So
Yeah,
as far as, go ahead.
it is true that they denied Trump resources throughout that candidacy, but
Sure.
and it was intentional, but I think, you could just as easily say that they didn't want to make Trump seem like a legitimate threat. If you're a potential voter, you show up to his rally and you see Secret Service out the hilt, then, Trump looks like a real serious leader type guy. I think if there was a nefarious intention, it was they wanted his campaign to look like a joke. You show up and it's like local cops. There aren't many Secret Service. They did the
Right.
same thing to RFK Jr. when he
Right.
did his brief third party run. He was denied some Secret Service protection. And I don't think they wanted RFK dead. Like, he wasn't really a threat. They just didn't want him to look legitimate.
Right. And if we're going historically, there's quite a bit more evidence that RFK needed Secret Service protection than
Yeah.
perhaps Donald Trump. Not that they're not both of, importance politically, but anyway, I digress. So there's a lot that happens on July 13th, which is the day of the assassination attempt. Um, without trying, I'm sure you're probably to some extent tired of talking about a lot of these little bitty details. I'm a little more, if you couldn't tell behind me, I'm a little bit more into the kind of mechanism part of the whole thing. But before I get into that, kind of briefly, as brief as you can, walk us through day of, Trump or whatever. They've got a rally planned. It's in a pretty big, it's just an open field, actually. I actually have a far away shot here. I don't know what time this picture is taken, but this is the scene at Butler, day of. So it's basically they're just holding a rally in a field. There's buildings kind of all around. It's kind of impromptu. It's almost like a rock concert in an effect, in a sense that we're just going to show up and you all show up and we'll have a really good time here. So if you could kind of walk us through briefly, there's Secret Service, there's local police, and then there is some form of like a local police SWAT team, assets there. We're all to assume that the Secret Service probably had the lead here, but as much as who's in control, who's running things, like what's happening kind of day of.
Yeah, if you leave that picture up, the first thing I guess
Sure.
we should really focus on is, the Secret Service is in charge of Trump's safety. The buck stops with them. But at any rally, they establish a perimeter where they have total jurisdiction, and then it's like local cops who handle outside of the perimeter. and the perimeter pretty much was just at that. It's the Butler Farm Show, that specific property. So you see the AGR building on the left side of the picture that
Right.
was eventually used as a perch by the would-be assassin Thomas Crooks. That's technically outside of the Secret Service's jurisdiction, or the perimeter, and that was totally the responsibility of the local police, which is just an absurd plan because it's only about 150 yards away from where Trump would eventually be speaking. And they were supposed to, what the agents have said is Trump's campaign was supposed to have parked a bunch of big trucks and farm equipment that would have blocked the view of the building, so nobody would have had a clear line of sight to Trump from that building. But of course, they show up that day and the trucks aren't there, the farm equipment isn't there, there's no obstruction, and nobody really took initiative to say, hey, we got to get this up before we have the event start. So the major failure there. I guess we'll fast forward to about 4 o'clock. Crooks had already been there that morning, kind of scoping out the area, and he goes back home. He gets his rifle in the afternoon, and then he returns and parks around the area of the AGR building. And he gets out and he flies his drone for about 15 minutes, I guess, getting an aerial view of what's happening. And he returns his drone to his car. And then it's about 15 minutes later that the Secret Service gets its drone detection equipment up and running, which is just a hell of a unfortunate coincidence, if you want to call it that, where, it's just almost immediately after Crooks lands his drone. Apparently, the guy operating the detection equipment was having trouble all morning and afternoon. He even called a hotline to try to get it back up and running, but he eventually realized it was a faulty Ethernet cable, is what he says. He switched out the cables, and now everything's back up and running right after Crooks lands his drone. So that was one of the first major security failures outside of just the overall setup. First sighting of Crooks was around 4:26. He was supposedly lingering around the AGR building, and this gets reported by the police. It's in congressional documents, but then footage comes out a couple weeks later of Crooks actually walking on the other side of the site, where a lot of the tents are, at the same time where he was first reported at 4:26. So he couldn't have been at two places at one time, and we don't know who the local police actually saw by the AGR building, but it's kind of one of the mysteries that hasn't been really answered, is like, why did the police think they saw somebody suspicious? It wasn't Crooks, so who was it? The first confirmed sighting of Crooks was shortly after 5 o'clock. Keep in mind, the shooting is at 6:11, and Trump took the stage at 6 o'clock. But they do see Crooks about an hour before Trump takes the stage, again by the AGR building. This is really him, and this time he has a rangefinder. And this gets put out over all the local radios. There's a suspicious person lingering around. He's got a rangefinder. This looks bizarre. This intelligence gets passed to the Secret Service, but the Secret Service doesn't do anything. They just leave it to the local cops to kind of track down this guy. And, for whatever reason, they didn't immediately question him. I guess he disappeared around the corner or something, but, they're kind of still sitting on their thumbs, not taking it really seriously. They do see him again around 5:50. He gets reported over all the local radios. This is shortly before Trump takes the stage. At one point, he realizes, I guess, the cops are looking at him, so he runs off around the building, and the cops think he's going around the building, but instead he actually climbs up on top. So while the cops are looking north, the cops are looking all north of the building complex. Meanwhile, he had gone in between two of the buildings. Now he's on top. He is spotted at around 6:05 on top of the building. The cops again, all the locals are now chasing him, and this message gets passed to the Secret Service. The Secret Service still doesn't do anything, and at this point, Trump is giving his speech on the stage. They don't pull him off. They don't even put the message out over the radios. They just send one or two agents to go help the locals, and those agents turned out to not have done anything. Uh, while all this is transpiring, there's another cop who's not even on duty. He's like at the local police station. He's hearing all the chatter and he decides to help in the chase. So he drives up to the AGR building and he has a partner boost him up onto the rooftop. And when he peeks his head over the roof, he sees Thomas with the rifle. Thomas points the rifle at the cop. The cop drops down, and now it's all hands on deck. He puts out over the radio, the guy on the rooftop is armed, but this is like too little too late. It's about 20 seconds before the shooting. The locals, they dispatch their SWAT team, but now, shots have been fired. And I'll stop here to see if you have any questions.
Yeah, I've got a ton of questions.
Mm-hmm.
So for those who are watching this live or later on, so I did a little bit of kind of map making. So this is the Butler Farm Show. This is Butler. This is the AGR building. I didn't realize how large the AGR kind of complex was. So there's a lot that I've learned in this just here in the last week, kind of fine details of that. I'll go back to the AGR complex. So this is in your book. This right here. So this is so north is north, north is up in this if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And this is the AGR building. Now, Crooks, as you were talking about, they kind of started to chase him to at least question him, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he takes off. And I assume it's hard to read this, but it's assumed that he's going to run around kind of running north towards the parking lot to the east. Is that kind
Mhm.
of what you understand?
Yes, and that's what the person who spotted him was one of the snipers who were in building 2 on the diagram, and they were looking north through one of the windows. It's a 2-story building they were in,
Okay.
and they see the one sniper sees Crooks, and Crooks takes off running, and he puts it out over the radio that he's going around the building towards the Sheets gas station, which would be maybe 400 yards northeast. It's on the corner of like Whitestown and Meridian, around that
Right up
area.
here.
There's a
Yeah.
gas station that the sniper mistakenly said that Crooks was going in that direction when he was just going in between, I think, building 4 and 5 or whatever. And he scaled on top of the roof using like an air conditioning that's kind of to shimmy up.
Yeah. So he naturally, if you're the law enforcement, you see a guy run, you wouldn't think that he would be running in between because you know the layout of the complex. So the officer, the sniper, is going to be like, well, he's going to run to open field. He's running to get away. Makes sense that you would run towards where a vehicle is, or across that street. I guess there were vehicles parked. I think this shows it. Yeah, there's vehicles parked kind of all over. It's catch as catch can as far as parking. I think that was another thing that Jim had mentioned was that he had to walk quite a ways to get to the
Yeah.
complex, or get to the rally. But before we get to Jim and where he was, is that so they think Crooks is running around the building. He runs in between the buildings. The FBI has a picture of the air conditioning units, and it's not like you just walk right up. You would have to actually get on top of the building. But I think what a lot of people don't understand, and I didn't understand this, was he got on top of basically building 6 here. So the northernmost building of this complex, he gets on the building, if I remember correctly, at like 6 p.m. closely, somewhere in there. So he gets on there. He's going to take the shot, everyone, from building 1 all the way at the very, very bottom. That's where Crooks is going to end up. That's where we see some cell phone footage of him kind of laying on the ground, kind of popping up, laying on the roof, laying flat on the roof, popping up, laying back down on the roof. So he's on building 6 and he walks. These buildings are connected all the way. Now they drop down and they come back up, but it's not hard. There's one of the body cam footage of the officer who popped up once he retrieves his rifle from his car. His body cam is still running. He gets boosted back up. The Crooks is already down at this point, but you see him. He gets boosted up on what I believe was like building 3, and then walks across to building 1 there. But Crooks is up here for what, approximately 10 to 11 minutes. He's on top of this building complex, just walking across. No one really seems to notice. No one really seems, and not that they should, other than, you know, you should have kind of, the snipers should be noticing. Maybe the people on the ground, you would have them notice a guy walking across the building. I would say that the average person, if you saw someone walking across the top of a building at a political rally who was not in police uniform or something to that effect, you would probably think, what is that guy doing? Perhaps I should alert someone. But he's up there, correct me if I'm wrong, for approximately 10 to 11 minutes before the first shot rings out.
I think it was like more like 6 to 7, but still
Okay.
a decent amount of time. Yeah, if you look at the upper left corner of the diagram, it says 1805. So 6:05, he climbs up. It might have been, the diagram might be incorrect. It might have been shortly before then. But yeah, and he actually runs. At one point, he's seen running from 6 to 1, like from north to south. And there's a cop on the east side close to the water tower who saw, hey, there's somebody up there running. So a cop did spot him, and that was around 6:08, which is, 3 minutes before the shooting, is when they realized he's on the roof. Again, this gets blasted to all the local cops, and the guy running the local command center calls the Secret Service command center and tells them the suspicious guy's on the roof. The Secret Service still did nothing about it. That we should also mention that local command center was separate from the Secret Service command center, which is another reason for all these miscommunication and just failures. Highly unusual, I guess, to have separate radio facilities.
Yeah, that I think is probably the biggest thing here, is that the communications were basically zero, because Secret Service is on a different channel. Local Smokies are on like 2 different channels. You have like a traffic channel, which kind of makes sense. I'm not a comms expert by any stretch of the imagination, but you're going to be doing a lot of traffic control, and those guys need to communicate, and they don't necessarily need to be on the same channel as the guys protecting the asset, the president, and basically clogging up that channel. But the idea that, and if you could talk more in depth about this, but the local, SWAT sniper guys, the Butler County guys, and then the Secret Service guys are not on the same communication channel, if I'm remembering that correct, right?
No, yeah, they were totally separate. The local SWAT team people were on the same radio system as the local traffic control and everything, but they were on different channels. And then the Secret Service radio system was totally separate. They had a Pennsylvania state trooper in the Secret Service command center, and the local command center leader would call the PSP trooper, and then the PSP trooper would relay the information to the Secret Service. So there was several layers there, and that's why, one of the questions that I really thought it was suspicious at first, like in the weeks and months after the shooting, is I'm like, the local command center seems like he really dropped the ball, because they know he's on the roof at 6:08, but he never tells his local snipers who are inside of the AGR building. Like, why didn't he just switch the channel to channel 4, radio them, and then they could look out the window and see crooks right on the roof, right beneath them? Right. Excuse me. But the reason he didn't do that is because he was calling the Secret Service command center and having these conversations like, there's a guy on the roof. So I think he still dropped the ball a little bit, but it's not like anything totally negligent or nefarious on his part. He was just trying to juggle a lot of balls at once.
Yeah, and it's, every delay that you have as far as trying to communicate is a delay in a reaction. So it's a delay. If I have to call you to tell a guy named Tom something else, well, how long does that take for you to relay that message? Even if he's in the same room with you, it's like, I'm going to call Ken because Ken's in the same room with Tom. So, hey, Ken, tell Tom to tell Bob to move his car 30 feet. Well, how long would that take to actually do all of that if it has to go through one, two, three channels before it gets to that guy? And when you're talking about, obviously someone with whatever the motivations were, he has a motivation to try and pull this thing off. And, once you're committed, once you're on the roof, you're kind of pot committed at that point, and it's kind of now or never. It's do or die, for lack of a better term, that
Mm-hmm.
I can only think of right now. So, seconds turn into minutes, and minutes turn into shots off, and a almost a complete catastrophe by all parties involved of protecting the president. And it's very easy for all of us to kind of Monday morning quarterback this whole thing. Um, but I think a lot of what this comes from is there's a lot of hubris from the feds in this, the Secret Service. We're the Secret Service, we do the thing, we have sniper. Look, we got snipers, it's fine, they can see, they can do all of this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the lack of communication comes in kind of twofold, that I can't relay a message directly to a Secret Service sniper, but also those Secret Service snipers cannot get a message back from me if I'm a local PD person or a local Smoky of, like, you know, from what I understand, the local guys had the AGR complex. So if you're a Secret Service sniper, and the two most famous snipers ever, who, from what I understand, neither of these guys got off a shot that I
No.
could tell. These are the two guys that everybody thinks one of these guys got the shot off on Crooks. When I've watched this video over and over and over, and I watched it over and over in the days, you know, after this happened, I see guys that are very unsure of who that person is on that rooftop. Um, they don't, from what and I'm giving them a lot of grace here, but from what I can tell, they're not sure that that's not a Butler County person. I don't know if you have any more insight into these guys or the Secret Service themselves, but that's the two-way street of communication. Is if I'm trying to radio back to my command center, hey, who is that? Hey, do we have somebody from Butler on the roof? Hey, does anybody else have eyes on this? Well, that delay is now 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever that delay is a big delay. I don't know if you have any more insight on the Secret Service trying to communicate with Butler and kind of around that same time.
Well, see, I actually am a little suspicious of the Secret Service snipers. So
Fair
yeah,
enough.
tell me what you think about this. But just the facts are that, first of all, they were offered local radios by the
Sure.
local sniper team leader, and they just didn't pick them up. Again, it could be hubris, as you say. They could have been just, oh, let's just get up to the barns. We don't want to walk across the site and pick up the local radios. Nothing's going to happen. They might be hungover. There was rumors about a lot of these guys partying at a
Fair enough.
Pittsburgh bar called Tequila Cowboy until like 3 in the morning that day, which would be par for the course for the Secret Service. But um, those guys that you have up actually never saw Crooks. They were blocked by trees. So these are also the guys you see kind of flinch when Crooks fires his first shots.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because they didn't know where the hell the shooting was coming from. They did hear some chatter about locals dealing with something by the AGR building. And then I think when they heard the shots, they probably just kind of freaked out. Those guys, if you're facing Trump, like you're watching it, all the famous footage, they would have been over Trump's right shoulder.
They're going to
It
be
was
right here. I sorry to cut you off there, but
no,
they're building one right here. That's those guys. They're over Trump's right shoulder. They would have been to our left as we're watching Trump.
Yeah.
Um, so this is that original shot from far away. So they're going to be on that left side building up there.
Yeah, those there's two barns that were behind Trump,
Yeah.
and they
Red
were
barns,
on.
white roofs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were on the barns closer to the AGR building, and they were blocked by those trees that you between the AGR building and
Mm-hmm.
them. It was the ones farther away that put the final bullet through Crooks. Although the sniper actually took 15 seconds to return fire, and he was not the guy that actually saved the day. This is the biggest to me. It is a scandal, even if you're not conspiratorial about it. Is that Crooks got off 8 shots in 5 seconds? It's pop, 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 three discrete shots. Then he starts after he misses, he starts rapid firing. It's pop, 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 and then a ninth shot immediately following that came from the ground from a local cop named Aaron Zalaponi, who returned fire again within the first 5 seconds. And then all the shooting stops for 10 whole more seconds until the Secret Service sniper put that final shot through Crooks. And, we could say, yeah, maybe the sniper just took a while to get him in his sights. Again, maybe he's hungover, maybe he panicked too. I don't know, but along with the delayed response, like 15 seconds seems like a really long time to me. We have footage of him looking through his scope towards the AGR building 7 seconds before the shooting started. So we know he was aware that something was going on there. He was monitoring the situation. And then we have his own notes that with a Senate committee that was investigating this obtained from the Secret Service. His own notes say that he saw Crooks crawling into place with a rifle before the shooting started. And
Right.
the thing is, he initially told Congress that he didn't see Crooks until Crooks had stopped firing. He says, Crooks got off all 8 shots, and then that's only then did I locate Crooks. I got him in my scopes and blew him away. But the sniper, it was almost like a Perry Mason moment where the Senate staffer pulled out the guy's own notes and it's like, well, your own notes contradict your testimony. Do you want to explain yourself? And the sniper insists that the notes are inaccurate. He didn't see Crooks crawling into place. He only saw Crooks after the shooting had stopped. I would imagine that the notes that he took immediately after the event were more accurate than his testimony.
Right.
And, again, you don't have to be conspiratorial. Well, we could be conspiratorial. Did he have some sort of stand down order? I think the question is legitimate because he did lie to Congress. But even if he didn't, even if he just messed up, he still lied to Congress, even if it's just because he wants to be the hero. It's a real scandal any way you cut it.
Yeah. And that guy's name is David King. We found out later on and was confirmed, I think, kind of accidentally by Trump after
Yeah.
I believe, the White House Correspondents' Dinner. But just before we move too far, we are conspiratorial on this show. I try to keep it to a minimum, but because a lot of facts get. I don't try to keep it to a minimum. That's untrue. I dive deep into the conspiracy, but I like to get factual, what we do know, what we don't know, and then
Yeah.
that I think lends a lot more to the conspiracy. So one of the conspiracies of this, a lot of misinformation. I can't believe I use that term. A lot of just things that are in the ether, in the lore of this shooting. I've heard Joe Rogan repeat this numerous times, and I grit my teeth every time I hear it. I even heard, I don't know, Ken, if you're familiar with Andy Stumpf, who he's got a podcast, former Navy SEAL, very good podcast. But I've even heard him in reference to the Butler shooting talk about, oh, he had iron sights on the rifle. And, this is where, again, my mind goes to this stuff instantly because it's like a big hobby of mine. But this is the rifle. So this is a DPMS Panther. This is an AR-15 rifle. You're okay to call it an AR-15 rifle, not just an AR style rifle. This is a legitimate AR-15. DPMS is a company that still kind of exists. They were They were part of the Remington brand. When Remington went bankrupt, it was sold off for parts. I forget who bought DPMS, but I think they're coming back. But this is an old rifle. You can't go buy this right now unless you're buying it on a secondary market. So this is a legitimate 16-inch barreled rifle, which is going to be your standard AR-15 rifle. It's got a Magpul stock there that can extend out. And the gun autists who are watching this live, it's okay. That buffer tube is intact. The buffer spring is there. This gun still functions as far as I know. But there are 45-degree offset iron sights on this, which, yes, gun autists, that is a bad idea. We don't do that. But there is an optic on this. There is no magnification to this. This is a Holosun AEMS optic. It's an enclosed optic. It is a pretty good optic, somewhere in the neighborhood of like a $300, give or take, optic. This is going to project a red dot, a dot in a circle. This is a very good optic for kind of close encounters, if you will. Really, this is an optic, and I'm going to piss off all of the autists right here. This is a 100-yard max optic, basically. This is not an ideal setup for what this cat was trying to do. This is not the route that I would have went. I would have wanted some magnification, but, thank God he wasn't smart on this whole deal, and he used this rifle. But there is an optic, and as far as I know, the optic worked. And is probably still working to this day, might just need a new battery. But this is going to lend some kind of credence to Aaron Zalaponi taking the shot, which probably stopped Crooks from shooting, which I agree with you. I think Zalaponi is the guy that actually ended this threat from the ground on the east side of the AGR building. Zalaponi was the guy who popped up, was he not? And then popped back down?
What do you mean he popped up?
He was the one who went on the roof and surprised.
Oh,
or
no.
Was he a separate guy?
No,
Okay.
The guy who climbed up on the roof was a detective who dropped down and actually twisted his ankle and then just kind of panicked, put it out over the radios. And then the command center guy dispatched. Zalaponi was actually stationed under the barn of the snipers who didn't see Crooks. That was where the quick reaction force was. And he was on the ground in between Trump and the building.
Okay.
So he was probably 75 yards away from Crooks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
With his, yeah.
Okay. So he probably had a red dot and was within 100 yards. So he made an effective shot. So I'll bring the firearm back up. So the buttstock there got hit by a bullet at some point. We're gonna deep dive into gun autism. Sorry, it's just what's gonna happen. But so I'm gonna get real critical of the United States Secret Service right here. What you're looking at is some sort of, and I hit up my guys. We don't really know exactly. This is a Remington 700 action, chambered in 300 Win Mag with a suppressor on the end of it. You can just barely see the suppressor sticking past this hydraulic piece right here on this rifle. This is an Accuracy International stock. We don't know if these were custom built or by the Secret Service, or they were built by Accuracy International and sold to the Secret Service. This is a custom rifle anyway. You slice it. You couldn't go buy this off the rack with all the money in the world. The 300 Win Mag is a very interesting caliber that they would be using. I don't really understand why they would be using a 300 Win Mag. Over penetration is a thing. Maybe they're really concerned with vehicle penetration, windshields, things of that nature. But the other part of this, which doesn't make sense, if you're concerned about having to interdict a vehicle of some sort, you wouldn't go with a bolt action rifle. For those who aren't familiar, bolt action means I fire, I have to cycle the bolt manually, then I can fire again. These look like 10-round magazines, detachable magazines. You would want to have something more along the lines of a SR-25, which is going to be like a scaled up AR-15 that fires a 7.62x51 or 308 Winchester rifle round. This kind of setup here is something like you would go shoot 800 to 1,200 yards, somewhere in that neighborhood. I don't know that the Secret Service is ever going to set themselves up in which they need to counter a threat at 1,000 yards and be lethal at 1,000 yards. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And in this scenario, when you're within 200 yards, so the 308, the 7.62 by 51 is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of a 4 to 600 is going to be kind of its max range, max effects. Now it'll shoot farther, but your effective range is going to be in there, which is plenty. So anything within that, you're going to be highly, highly effective with whatever you're doing. Vehicles included in that. So if I have to interdict a vehicle, I'm going to need probably more than 5 to 10 rounds, and I would like to be able to put more than the movies are not accurate where you just fire one round and the vehicle stops. That's not how the things work. So when I see these guys doing this, that doesn't make sense. The rifle setup. Another thing that doesn't make sense is you have two-man teams on sniper crews for a reason, and one of those reasons is one guy is on the binoculars, the other guy is on the rifle. Now they can both have rifles. Makes kind of sense. Both guys have binoculars, both guys have rifles. They're going to take turns switching on and off. But a lot of what we saw from these two guys, now it makes sense that they couldn't see him because of trees and they're trying to locate him. But the guy who's laying down, and I don't have the video, but it's out there. The guy who's kneeling down, he repositions himself, and this is a perfect picture of he's off the scope looking with his naked eye trying to find the shooter because his scope is not working to find the shooter. He can't get a sight picture from the scope, so he has to come off the gun to try to find the guy, which means the gun is ineffective at that point. All of this to be highly critical of them and kind of point to the overall kind of lack of just thought, follow through, complacency. Just I've referred to this as a comedy of errors that happened that day. When you factor in the communications, the setup, all of this, it all just is very, very it's very Bush League, if you will, minor league kind of thing. But I want to get back to David King in him taking that final shot. But is it your belief that, and we don't know this for fact, if we do, obviously let me know, but that what hit that buttstock and damaged it was, do we think that was David King's final shot 15 seconds in after Crooks is already down, or do we think that was Zalaponi's shot from the ground?
Yeah, it depends who you ask. If you ask the federal government, the Secret Service, the FBI, or the medical examiner who autopsied Crooks, they'll all tell you that Aaron Zalaponi did not hit Thomas Crooks at all. The local cop shot but didn't hit anything, and then it was King's bullet that went through Crooks's upper lip, out the neck, through the stock, back into Crooks's shoulder, and then it fragmented twice and made 2 re-exit wounds. But then there's a lot of others, people like Gary Melton, the Paramount Tactical online, and he has done analysis saying that he does think Zalaponi's bullet is the one that hit the stock of the rifle. Just reason dictates that Zalaponi's bullet had to have done something because Crooks stopped firing after Zalaponi fired. So if he didn't, why would Crooks have stopped shooting if the local cops' return fire didn't hit him at all, didn't even hit the gun? And to top it off, Crooks's body was actually released for cremation with fragments still inside of the shoulder, like a bunch of tiny little right, particle-like fragments. And maybe you can explain it to me, but I've been told that was probably 223 fragments, like a big 300 Win Mag bullet isn't going to fragment it like tiny like that. It's like a giant slug that just went through his body like butter, and it was probably 223 fragments from Zalaponi. But I don't know.
It's so this is the Charlie Kirk conspiracy too of, I don't know how much you've heard or dug, kind of dug into the Charlie Kirk magic bullet, if you will. Bullets do weird things when they hit stuff. It's just that simple. Could a 300 Win Mag fragment like that, especially after passing through, facial tissue, neck tissue into, hitting that buttstock. Sure. I don't know what type of projectile that the Secret Service was using that day. I don't know if it was some sort of like ballistic tip, hollow point, open tip match, full metal jacket. Odds are it was probably going to be something in the neighborhood of like a 220 grain open tip match, which is not a it's not a fragmenting round. It's not designed to fragment. It's designed to be highly accurate. Now, will they fragment? Sure. You're talking about, metal moving at a high rate of speed. Things happen. Will a 223 round fragment? It will. At 75 yards with a shoulder shot, it's probably just going to disintegrate your shoulder and keep going. But again, bullets do weird things when they hit living tissue, when they hit a medium like that. It doesn't matter if it's a deer, if it's a human, if it's whatever. You can watch all the guys who go online and they shoot they shoot the ballistic gel. Okay, great. So you have this wound channel. It doesn't really prove anything. They shoot the ballistic human, where they replicate bone and all of this. Well, you don't have the fluid capacity and the fluidity of, we're 70% water or whatever we are. That plays a huge role in it. Or they're shooting cow bones and things of that nature. There's no real way to know what a bullet does other than to use it on the medium you're going to use. And then that's really the only way you know what it's going to do. Again, the most common round of a 5.56 round is going to be like a full metal jacket. We're sending a very, very small projectile at a very, very high rate of speed. And the idea is it hits and it tumbles. It also defeats a lot of armor. It's going to defeat, a lot of things you're going to come in contact with if you're just a patrol officer, your average cop who has this in his car. So it's possible, yes, is my short answer. Is it probable? Not really, that the 300 Win Mag would do that. It probably, if it's the round I think it is, it's just going to go basically straight through and devastate everything it hits. But it's just also true for that 5.56 round. But the 5.56 round is going to tumble. Now, there's the possibility that if you can picture what the sight picture might have been for Zalaponi, it's going to be his head sitting on a rifle, or there somewhere thereabouts. The biggest sight picture Zalaponi's going to have is Crooks's head. So the idea that he shot and hit Crooks, maybe he hits him in the neck and that bullet sails through, and then King shoots and he has an angle and it comes through and actually, I don't know how you would determine necessarily that bullet didn't just hit Crooks in the shoulder or hit the buttstock and hit the shoulder. My belief is that Zalaponi probably scored a headshot, and it probably, as it went into the head, it took a kind of downward angle, downward turn. That's kind of what 223s do, is they tumble, they go the wrong direction. But I'm on 100% agreement with you that Zalaponi is the guy that stopped this threat. He stopped Crooks dead in his tracks, pardon the pun. But one of the things that really stuck out to me, and one of the questions I kind of answered kind of just through multiple videos and putting together, but I'm curious what you think about. So the belief is that Crooks had this rifle disassembled in this bag, and this backpack is found on the AGR building, basically right where he kind of went up, if I have that correct. And that he looks like he assembled the rifle on the AGR building 1, was it? If I remember, yeah, building 1. So this bag is basically found kind of just north of the little black box there. And there's a cell phone video that someone shot where they're yelling, "Hey, there's a guy on the roof." And we just see Crooks's back, and it looks like he's fiddling with something. And I would assume that's when he's assembling the rifle, putting it back together. And again, for those who are not aware, assembling an AR-15 is 2 pins. You put 2 pins together and load a magazine in, and now you have a functioning rifle. But it looked like he loaded that rifle, then crawled into place there. Do you really think that, or do we know, was he spotted wearing this backpack like when he darted in between the buildings?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't remember. I think he had it though. Uh, yeah, I don't remember.
There's that famous picture that was like taken out of the window where you see the back of Crooks and he's like looking off to the right.
Mhm.
I believe one of the Butler County guys took that photo, and he does not have a backpack on at that point. So I guess there's a possibility, and maybe I was thinking about this today. There's a he so the day of, he goes there early, leaves, then comes back, and he buys a ladder and some ammunition that day. Is that correct?
Yeah, he bought a ladder that morning from Home Depot, but they did not use the ladder to get on the roof.
Correct.
He
So
abandoned the ladder in the Pittsburgh area.
okay. Um, is it possible you think maybe he staged this backpack with the ladder and no one found it?
You mean like pre-positioned the backpack up on the roof and then just went up there and it was already up there for him, or?
Potentially, because we don't, as far as I know, there's no radio comms, there's no picture, there's no one saying, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, no one ever said, hey, there's a guy in a backpack.
Yeah,
That
that's
was
a good
Crooks.
that's a good question. I don't recall that specifically. I know there was a bicycle and a backpack that were in the area where Crooks was spotted, and then he runs off. But that turned out not to belong to him. It belonged to somebody else. But the local cops also thought that might have been belonging to the assassin, but it wasn't.
One of the things that made me start thinking about that is it is possible to fit that upper on the left in that backpack with some it's going to be tough and it's going to be obvious that there's something in that backpack. And so I kind of thought, well, if he staged it somewhere, that would explain why he was there early. That might explain the ladder, whether he used it or not. There is some kind of explanation there, but this is my conspiracy side of it, guys. Ken's book is very in depth on what we actually know and what we can prove and things like that. But do we happen to know from like a report, Ken, about how many rounds were left in the magazine, like unfired?
That has not been reported to my knowledge. No.
That is interesting to me of why they don't report those things. I don't understand why they don't report things like that. That ties into some of the Charlie Kirk stuff as well. But the autopsy to me is a big, big, big deal, big red flag, which I think is a big red flag to a lot of folks and probably yourself. Do we have an autopsy as far as um, that like is a map that shows bullet wounds or exits or anything like that? Have you seen anything like that?
We don't have any diagrams. No. It was explained to me that when the cause of death is very clear, gunshot wound through the neck, the medical examiner isn't going to go through the time to like. There's been, we were talking about the Oklahoma City bombing before we went on the air, and there was a cop named Terrence Yeekey who
Yep.
was, looks like suicided. Like he was actually murdered, and they tried to say it was a suicide, but diagrams were done there because he had so many wounds all around the body. But that was more like because it was ambiguous. Where here, it looks like the medical examiner didn't even take the time to do that, which I think he should have, considering what a high profile case is. This isn't just like your Thursday night shooting in Pittsburgh.
Right. This is kind of important of
Yeah.
a person in an investigation, I would say. And I think that kind of lends to the conspiracy side of like, huh, you didn't think maybe you go the extra mile on the, would be assassin of a former president and at the time presidential candidate. Interesting. So we don't have that. We have, I believe in your book, you had an x ray that you obtained that showed the fragments
Yeah.
in Crooks's right shoulder, which we just see fragments. It could be plastic, it could be metal, right? Or is it all metal? Do we know that?
I don't know. Would plastic show up in an X-ray?
No clue, not a doctor. I
Yeah.
was thinking it as I said it. I don't think plastic shows up in an x ray, but, I was also thinking as I was saying, well, hey, bones kind of show up, but, kind of different material. But it was pretty glowing in there that it was pretty obvious that it was something of some substance. Um, but also, the go over the autopsy of what actually was done and kind of the report we what report we did get.
Yeah. So, after the shooting, the body was left on the rooftop until 6 in the morning the next day. And then it was taken to another county, Allegheny County, not Butler County, where the Pittsburgh medical examiner did the autopsy. And the reason we were given is because Butler County didn't have a full on medical examiner. They only had a coroner, which isn't as highly trained. They don't have the same facilities. So they had to go to Pittsburgh where all the fancy equipment is and everything. But then, as we just discussed, they really did the kind of just run of the mill autopsy. I was the guy that got the report where he's just talking about the gunshot wounds, you know, an entry and exit, a re-entry and two re-exits, all just from the Secret Service's 300 Win Mag bullet. And that's pretty much the only things worth mentioning in the actual autopsy report. He did also conduct a toxicology report, which I think is even more interesting in that the report shows that he collected about seven specimens from the body, like urine, eye fluid, some bile, envelope of hair, and he labels these substances on the report like 1 through 7. But if you look at the results, the report only includes results for a couple of the specimens. So he either didn't test everything or he didn't include certain things in the report. And then we're told, well, he wasn't on drugs of abuse, which means like he wasn't on fentanyl or cocaine or meth. But my big question is, were these other specimens tested, SSRIs, psychotropic drugs, antidepressants, things like that? They either didn't test or they just omitted it from the report for possibly political reasons, I would argue.
Like maybe he was under LSD and he's part of a bigger thing from the Central Intelligence Agency or Charles Manson or something to that nature. Yeah, it's very odd that you would take this stuff, the 7 specimens, and then you're just like, whatever. He got shot. I don't care. There's
Yeah.
fragments in it, and it's just like, well, was he drinking too the night before at the Tequila Sunrise or wherever those guys
Yeah.
were? I mean, it's just like you're just phoning this in, and like, you know, why is there no like outcry, or maybe there is an outcry from the local people of Allegheny County or Butler or whatever that says, hey, this is kind of showing on all of us. Like, can you do a little bit better job here? Like, medical examiners typically, or I don't know, I guess it depends, are like elected or appointed. Like, there's kind of a punishment there if you're not doing your job, I would think. So, like, do you know if there was like a local outcry of like, you're making us look dumb here?
Well, the local politicians and government officials have all been very tight lipped. Although I did obtain the reports from Butler County, uh, and so maybe that I never would have gotten them from Allegheny County because they were kind of playing shell games with the evidence. Where I had requested the reports from Allegheny County, and they said, "While we did the autopsy and the toxicology, this is Butler County's jurisdiction, so you have to go get it from them." And they gave it to me relatively painlessly. I did have to pay like $700 for about 20 pages, which is that's just like it's in the law. That's what they cost. So yeah, maybe the Butler County, they're like, well, we can't say anything publicly, but we're going to make sure these documents get out so people realize and then realize that it's really not on us. I don't know. That's just speculation. I know like the actual citizens there, the voters, especially the pro-Trump people, are still, all up in arms about what happened.
As they should be, and as is kind of expected with the MAGA crowd, the Trump crowd. They're kind of that people, if you will, and I'm one of those of like, this is our country, this is our guy, this is these, there were people killed here, or one person who was killed here, two other people were wounded, and that's I kind of want to touch on that too. The foreword was written by Jim Copenhaver, who was wounded that day, still has a bullet in him. And then Corey Compentor, I can't ever say the
Comparatory. Yeah.
yeah, I can't do it. Unfortunately, it's just my public education out here in the sticks. He was killed, unfortunately. I actually found a video that's on YouTube that is unedited. And I'm not going to link to it. I wish I had not watched it. You don't actually see Corey like in the foreground, but there's, you see people trying to revive him. Um, but I didn't understand. I just assumed, and I'm going to put my little, dime store map up here, dollar store map up here. So Jim Copenhaver is in Bleacher C.
Mm-hmm.
So if for those who are not seeing the visual, Trump is on stage, and so if you picture you're watching Trump speak, directly behind Trump is Bleacher B. To your left, Trump's right would have been Bleacher A, and to Trump's left, your right, as you're watching him speak, would have been Bleacher C. So Jim is in Bleacher C and takes 2 rounds. He survived, obviously. But Corey is in Bleacher A, which I had just assumed that, Corey would have been right there near Jim, and those hail of bullets would have just kind of, catch as catch can. Luck, worst day of your life to be lucky or unlucky. But Corey was in Bleacher A. Um, I I don't know exactly which. Maybe which volley got him or Jim. Do you know which was it? The first three, or was it the coinciding five? Or do you
I
know?
think Jim and then the other guy that got shot, David Dutch, they might have been hit with the second and third rounds, but Corey was hit with probably the fifth round, we think. And we know that because he was actually filming when he was shot. That's another horrific video that we were
Yeah.
able that Helen actually voluntarily disclosed to a documentary team. Then that's probably when Crooks started more shooting wildly with the second volley, is why Corey got hit, even though he wasn't really in the line directly between Crooks and Trump. He's kind of a little bit to Trump's front.
Yeah, that's do not seek out those videos, folks, because they're out there, and you don't want to see them. I do want to. So the tracking of finding out who Crooks is very near and dear to my heart, in that the ATF, or maybe you can run through how the ATF figured out, or how the federal government figured out who this guy was on the roof and all of that.
Yeah, well, the ATF did a trace on the rifle and traced it back to a gun store, and they found out that it was actually Crooks's father who purchased the rifle. And we don't really have many more details about how they confirmed Thomas's identity, other than they started conducting surveillance on uh, Matthew Crooks's home in Pittsburgh, where Thomas lived with his father, and doing a background check, they pulled up Thomas's driver's license and kind of, well, this face looks like the dead guy on the roof. Although the license photo is him, clean cut kind of hairstyle, kind of like mine, and on the roof, he's got the longer stringy hair. But that's pretty much all we know. They knocked on the door of the father around 11 o'clock, and he opens it up and he's like, "Is it true? Uh, is my son dead? Is he the one that shot at Trump?" And the law enforcement officer, an ATF agent, was immediately taken aback because he's like, "Well, how
Sure.
do you know? Like, why do you suspect your son?" But then he said, "Well, the news, like CNN, called me 10 minutes ago, so it seems like somebody leaked the information to the reporters." But then the FBI and Pennsylvania State Police held a press conference around midnight that night, and the
Sure.
PSP, I think like deputy commissioner, says, well, there were some complicating factors in identifying who this guy was. We're gonna, we'll tell you about that later. And then they never followed up on it. So all we really know is tracing the rifle. It would be nice to have, the facial recognition analysis, because there's a lot of conspiracies that, well, that really wasn't Crooks. I don't know
Right.
why they would replace somebody else with Crooks, but or blame Crooks when it was somebody else. But you've got all kinds of conspiracies. But to dispel them, having the facial recognition would be helpful from the government.
So I'm curious. Do we know a rough timeline from how long it took to trace the firearm to find the dad to you know and all of that? Do we know, like, did it take 30 minutes? Did it take 3 hours? Or do we know a timeline on that?
The trace itself didn't take too long. I think the ATF former director Stephen Dettelbach even testified about this, touting like, well, we were right on the case. We were able to get, trace the rifle within an hour or so. But then that's still like 7 p.m., 8 p.m., and they don't actually search the house until like 11 p.m. So what they were doing in the interim is unclear. Again, we've heard reports that night that there were complicating factors in confirming the identity. We don't know what those reports are.
The reason I asked that question is the ATF, the federal government, but the ATF specifically, is forbidden from creating a registry. They're also of any sort. Yeah, exactly. And I'm obviously asking leading questions here, hoping you can you have some can shed some light on them. But the idea that, so we're talking, this is 6 p.m. local time when all of this basically goes down. By the time they secure the scene, start to begin the investigation, we can assume it's at least 7 p.m. on a Saturday, right? How
Yeah.
is it we go from 7 p.m. on a Saturday? We have this rifle. Okay, we're going to look up the serial number on this rifle. So I got to call into FBI headquarters, or excuse me, ATF headquarters, and I have a record of where this gun has gone from the day it was manufactured to the gun shop it went to the final FFL holder. They are not allowed to have the record of that FFL and who they sold that weapon to. What they have to do is they have to figure out, okay, it went to Joe Bob's gun shop, and I have to get in touch with Joe Bob's gun shop, and then Joe Bob's gun shop, I believe, I'm not exactly sure the mechanism here, and I should have figured this out from some sources, but they have to then tell the ATF, whether they have to have a warrant, probable cause, whatever. Okay, we sold it to, you know, Mr. Crooks. Okay, fair enough. But what it seems to me is that they had a backdoor gun registry and they were able to do all of this without the actual gun shop. Now, most gun shops, and assuming he bought it at a gun, do we know where the rifle was originally required? You don't have to say it out loud, but do we know where it was originally purchased by the father?
It was a gun shop. I'm
Okay.
quite sure. Yeah.
So, most gun shops on a Saturday, are closed by like 3 p.m., 5 p.m., what have you. So it's very interesting to me they were able to do all of this while the gun shop is not conducting business. Now, there may be some extenuating circumstance that when the ATF calls, like I hold an ATF license for collector's firearms. I get emails from the ATF about robberies that happen in my area, which is odd. But I also get the automated phone call. You don't have to answer. They're not doing anything. It's just their whole system. There may be something where if you're a federal firearms license dealer, that you better answer this phone or call them back or whatever. But the fact of the matter is if you're in your personal capacity and you have your cell phone on you, I don't know how they can compel you to stop everything that you're doing, answer this phone call, go back to the shop, do all of the things and give them the records. Like this just seems like this would take forever. Like this would have taken 5 hours or so, but like obviously CNN knew because they had already called the father. So it's very dubious to me on the ATF, and I'm going to use that as a segue to get into Oklahoma City. So for those who don't know, Ken's handle on the Twitter, which it is still Twitter, it is not that letter that they've named it to, is JD Cashless. And for those who, some folks have listened to this show, understand who JD Cash was. He did a lot of groundwork on the Oklahoma City bombing, and there is a documentary coming out on the Tucker Carlson Network that is it just called OKC Bomb?
I believe, yeah, I believe so.
So that is the file name that the FBI gave the Oklahoma City bombing, if I remember correctly. So, I've mentioned on the show before that I've been doing some of my own research in the Oklahoma City bombing, and I think that this is where I get conspiratorial. Is that I think the Oklahoma City bombing plays into Butler a little bit in that there's a lot of hubris that happens. There's a lot of just intelligence gathering, maintaining. It plays into this in the way that, Oklahoma City plays into Butler, the way that Oklahoma City plays into 9/11, the way that Waco plays into Oklahoma City, and the way that Iran-Contra plays into both Waco and Oklahoma City. And I don't know how deep a dive you guys went on that documentary. I can't wait to watch it. But there is one thing besides Timothy McVeigh being at Waco during the siege of the Branch Davidians. There's another thing that kind of binds those two together in that Timothy McVeigh was very active in the gun show community at the time, linked to some white nationalist groups. That's a very dubious term to say the least. Some were just kind of labeled that Elohim City. But the thing that kind of binds those two together is that night vision is a thing that comes up. That the Branch Davidians claim that they had night vision goggles at the time. They had night vision, which is not, you can go buy night vision now, but in 1993, you really couldn't go buy night vision. And this was like the tip of the spear stuff that our military had kind of, I don't remember if they had tipped their cap or tipped their hand that they had it in the first Gulf War. And it might have been more of guys coming back kind of talking about it. Somalia, they definitely had it. But the Branch Davidians had night vision. And one of the things that links the FBI was tracing what they say were stolen night vision headsets, were tracing or tracking those through the local gun show community, which then ended up with some of the guys that Timothy McVeigh had interactions with, I believe if it was San Saba, Texas, in the Austin area. And so this whole night vision thing has a kind of Fast and Furious vibe under Obama of we're going to let these things kind of go and we're going to track where they end up. Um, and so the ATF was kind of part of this whole thing. It is my belief that there is a second bomber, a John Doe number 2 is real. Um, I don't know how much you want to divulge without giving the scoop of the documentary. That's is the documentary out? I guess I should ask that.
It's going to come out on September 3rd, and I think it'll
Okay,
be paywalled on Tucker Carlson's site. Eventually, it'll be made public for everybody, and it's actually going to be a series. The
has
guy,
to be.
so I only helped out. I've been covering OKC, kind of researching it for about 5 or 6 years now, and so the documentarian, we were mutuals on Twitter for a while. His name's Scooter Downey, and he told me about the project a few years ago, and I helped him track down various witnesses and players involved in this sprawling kind of saga. And so that's pretty much the extent of my involvement. I don't know everything that's going to come out in the episode, but all the researchers I've been working with are singing the producer's praises. I think it's going to be probably the best project ever made on this story.
Yeah, I know you're linked up with the Libertarian Institute in some capacity, and they have a very good archive there. I saw that Mr. Trinidad is a part of this documentary,
Oh
which he
yeah.
has to be. He is kind of the guy when it comes to OKC. I saw that I think it was recent that you put an article on your website, Headline USA, about the government dragging its feet they'll release the documents in like 20 years about something on OKC. I'm curious, kind of, what are your thoughts about the Oklahoma City bombing as far as the conspiracy? Because I think there's really no doubt that Tim McVeigh was a bomber. He had said that he was. We don't. His motivations were pretty clear. He made it very clear, at least. I don't think he was. It doesn't appear to be a full blown patsy, if one at all. So I'm just curious, kind of, what your thoughts on the overall conspiracy of OKC are.
Well, that's interesting you brought up Fast and Furious because I've actually been increasingly thinking about it in those terms, although not with the night vision goggles. Although that's really interesting how you put it. I hadn't thought of it like that. I've been thinking of it in terms of they had an operation going that was tracking neo-Nazi bank robbers who
Mm-hmm.
were kind of trying to fund a right-wing revolution. And we tracked down a police officer who knew these guys, repeatedly told the FBI where they were, how they could arrest them. And the FBI told them that we're tracking the money to see where the money's going so we could kind of roll up the entire right wing underground. They were letting these neo Nazi bank robbers
Mm-hmm.
rob banks with impunity so then they could make this giant conspiracy case. Anybody who got any money can get arrested, and then they'll collapse the entire right wing. And there's historical precedent with this. There was a group of right wing bank robbers in the 80s called the Order, and they actually hauled off with like $2.5 million. And I think that was actually legitimately organic domestic terrorism. And the FBI was kind of trying to recreate that in the 90s, where they were almost urging these bank robbers to do what they were doing so they could track the money. And then these same bank robbers were going to Elohim City. That was one of their hideouts where Timothy McVeigh was known to have visited too. So that's the nexus between these bank robbers and McVeigh. McVeigh was also rumored to have been a bank robber himself. He
Right.
sent money to his sister to wash and to kind of launder. He told her he was robbing banks. And so I think they were tracking this money, and then it was probably a failed sting operation. The bombing happens, and now there's this giant cover up that is, 31 years and counting, because it was this like Fast and Furious on steroids, or your Fast and Furious they're letting guns walk, and one of the stolen or illegally obtained guns was used to kill a border patrol agent. That was a big scandal. Well, this is like they accidentally funded a terrorist cell that killed 168 people, including 19 children. It's like orders of magnitude worse.
Yeah, it's a bad deal to say the least.
Yeah.
Um, I think Scott Horton had Jesse Trinidad, and I can't remember the other guy. He had him on his show. Gosh, it's been at least a year ago, if not longer.
Yeah.
And one of the things I remember him talking about was, so if you take PatCon, Patriot Conspiracy, which is the FBI, that's basically the FBI's program to track these right wing nationalists, these
Mm-hmm.
white supremacist groups, all of that. They, and I can't remember the name of the gun shop, but the gun shop that was used to sell the weapons for Fast and Furious, he had made the statement that that gun shop was existent in existence back then, and
It
they were
was,
using
yeah.
that gun shop to try to track these right wing nationalist groups, white nationalist groups. And he had also said that that same gun shop had a gun go through it, or maybe a couple of guns that ended up in the hands of some jihadi terrorists who pulled off the shootings there in Paris, I
Paris.
think in 2012, which is
Yep.
like just mind blowing stuff here.
And the
Um,
Garland shooting. Are you familiar
yeah,
with that one?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's as I do this, you mentioned the bank robbers, the Aryan Republican Army as they went by. They were an outgrowth, from what I understand, of the order. Like they had some. The order had a couple of members who got together and murdered a Jewish radio show
Yep.
host, I believe, in the early '80s. So those guys went to prison. I think got executed at some point, as well they should. But they murder this guy. They get picked up. I think it was in Colorado, but they get picked up. And then this is an outgrowth, the Aryan Republican Army, and this is a interesting bunch to say the least. They're led by a guy named who goes by Commander Pedro, a Peter Kevin Langan, and he is an interesting character in that he in 2014, while he's in prison, he's been in prison since I think 1995, 96, somewhere in there. Far as we know, he had nothing to do directly with the bombing. Excuse me, I dead named him. He goes by Donna Langen now because he
Mm-hmm.
transitioned to a woman in 2014, and he was actually the first federal inmate to be transitioned on the American tax dollar.
That's exactly right. It's like stuff that you think this would be like punch it into AI and tell me the craziest conspiracy theory
Right.
where there's a neo-Nazi bank robber connected to Timothy McVeigh goes on to make history as the first person to get a sex change in prison after being represented by like these high-powered leftist law firms who
Mm-hmm.
are like, oh, we this is enforcing rights. Their client was a neo-Nazi domestic terrorist, and there are actually some questions as to how involved he was in the bombing. He did try
Right.
to tell the government that some of his fellow robbers were involved.
Mm-hmm.
Guys named Scott Stedford and Kevin McCarthy. He
Mm-hmm.
accused them of being involved, but they flipped one of them to be state's witness, and they actually had that guy testify against Langan, so he wasn't able to, uh, you know, make any of these accusations in court. But yeah, it's a very tangled tale.
Well, to tie it back into kind of Butler in a broader scope is that I think, let me look back here. I guess Donna Langen, I don't want to get in trouble here, um, was released from custody in 1990, September of 1993, to be an informant for the United States Secret Service, which is okay, I guess. That doesn't make any sort of sense. Like, why is the Secret Service have anything to do with a bank robber? I know they investigate counterfeit crimes, but as far as I could tell, he had nothing to do with any sort of counterfeiting. He was just about, you know, robbing banks to get money to then buy weapons to then overthrow the government. It's like question mark, profit kind of thing.
Hmm.
Like, but yeah, you're right. Like, if you were to try to create this character in a movie, people would turn it off. But this is real life. This guy's still alive. Um, it's still happening. Do you believe that there is a John Doe number two?
Oh yeah, if you held a gun to my head and said you have to pick, I would say for sure. I mean, there were over 20 witnesses who saw somebody with McVeigh on the morning of April 19th when the attack happened, and then the FBI puts out a giant manhunt for John Doe 2. We've got there's YouTube videos still up of Janet Reno, the then Attorney General, saying John Doe 2 is still at large. He's believed to be armed and dangerous. If you see anybody matching this description, uh, call us. Don't try to apprehend him himself. And then they just turn around and say, oh, no, all 22 witnesses were mistaken. This is like just a big mix up, and John Doe 2 doesn't exist. And I believe it's probably something that has to do with John Doe 2 being an informant or possibly an undercover agent. And that's why they realized that. And then they had to do a big turnaround.
Yeah, I agree with that. In that promo that I shared for the documentary that's coming out from the TCN network, there is when they're talking about the witnesses that saw John Doe number two, one of the um, sketches that I guess is part of that is an eyewitness testimony looked like Commander Pedro, looked like Donna Langen in sunglasses. A very kind of petite, demure, stringy, longish hair down to his chin. If I were to throw up, if you were to throw up right now, they're like booking mud shots. You would go, well, that's who that person saw. That's exactly who they described. Like you would pick that guy out of a lineup instantly. And it's like, but yeah, they spent all of this time and this resources of saying there's John Doe number two. First of all, they released the sketches and saying that these are the guys. And then it's like, oh, let's crop that out. It's just Tim McVeigh. But I also look at it and it's like the sketch that is allegedly Timothy McVeigh. Well, it also looks like another guy who was there um, at the time there in Pittsburgh, or not Pittsburgh, but in Kansas with them and was part of the Aryan Republican Army. It also looks like him. I can't remember his damn name, but he was one of the younger members of it. And it's like,
Oh,
you
Michael
know,
Brescia. Yeah.
yes, Michael Brescia. And you look at this and you're like, okay, I guess. And then there's the very odd character of Andreas Strassmeyer, the German, who comes into this picture, is at Elohim City. Tim McVeigh, I believe, makes a phone call asking for Andy, and he's not there. And then it's like, and then this guy's just living in Germany now, and no one is cares or seems to want to know, like, well, what did this guy have to do with this whole thing? And there's the obvious tie-in that if these are a bunch of neo Nazis in a neo Nazi group, well, there's this German guy whose father is right at the right age to have been in Germany at the wrong time of the windmill guys. So it's like, does he not tie in? I mean, if you're familiar with Andy the German, do you think there's some sort of tie in with him into this whole, like, kind of grand scheme of things of these groups?
Yeah. The theory there that it would be that Strassmeyer was a government agent. I think he actually even did like some training in Israel. He did counterintelligence work in Germany, and then he sent there some sort of joint operation between Germany, Israel, and the U.S. to track neo Nazis. Because we do know that they had a joint operation at the time to interdict Nazi literature, because of course under the First Amendment you're allowed to have that in the US, but it's illegal in Germany. So they'd print it in America and ship it to Germany. And, German law enforcement wanted to know, how do we disrupt this pipeline? And that would be where Strassmeyer comes in. He's networking with these people, and he's friends with a lot of the Nazi bank robbers. Another guy named Dennis Mahan, who's in jail for domestic terrorism right now, and he was probably a spy. And then again, this whole thing goes sideways, and they have to get him out of the country real quick because people are asking questions about him. And so that's probably what happened. Another fun fact, you mentioned Iran Contra at the top of the show, how it's connected to OKC. The guy who got him out of the country is named David Holloway, and he was like a CIA pilot during Iran Contra. He helped Strassmeyer escape, and now Holloway is currently a contractor for NASA. He's still working for the government, and it's like, how would you maintain your security clearance if you were associating with this milieu of Nazi criminals in the 90s, and now you're working for NASA? It's just nuts.
Well, there's a Nazi to NASA pipeline that's
Fair enough, yeah.
so that's one of those things. It's another one. I can't remember what was the guy's name. There's another kind of like Iran Contra tie-in to this.
Roger Moore, you're probably thinking of, or John Matthews. Pretty much, there was a militia that volunteered in Iran Contra called the Civilian
Military Assistance. Yeah,
yeah,
Tom Posey.
CMA.
Tom Posey.
And a lot of those guys ended up in the militia movement in the early 90s after Iran Contra, and they're all part of this milieu with McVeigh, the gun show circuits, and all like that. There were a lot of Iran Contra guys. McVeigh's partner, Roger Moore, he was like their partners in the gun show circuit, and he was part of this CMA group with Tom Posey.
Yeah, Tom Posey is the conduit of the night vision.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Posey was brought up on some charges and I think might have served some time on that whole thing. That's not who I was thinking of, though. I was thinking of, the guy I'm thinking of got convicted on a murder charge and was put on death row and was executed the day of the Oklahoma City bombing.
Oh, that's
Richard Snell.
Richard Wayne Snell. I don't think he was part of Iran Contra, was he? Unless you know something.
No, so it's much deeper. So Richard Snell was executed the day of the Oklahoma City bombing. Later in the day, he saw it. Whatever. He was convicted murderer, and but Richard Wayne Snell first, I think, was arrested by the Arkansas State Police, and he was making claims that the Governor Bill Clinton, was part of the CIA running drugs into Mena, Arkansas. And they're like, this crazy guy, whatever, which obviously at the time, if you're Arkansas State Police, you're like, this guy's, he's off his rocker. He's a neo-Nazi. He's part of the Covenant and the Sword. I forget the whole name, the CSA.
Yeah.
And, he's a crazed neo-Nazi. He's out of his mind. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And then years later, when you find out that, the CIA was running, drugs and guns to the Contras and, with this whole backdoor thing and the whole Iran Contra thing. And you're like, well, maybe he was right. He was crazy, but, he also had a point. I don't know how he knew what he knew, but he knew something. And, if anybody's seen the Tom Cruise movie, that I know obviously they're taking some artistic liberties there, but the idea that Mena was this drug hub for the CIA bringing in drugs and taking out weapons is not crazy. That thing happened, and using pilots to do that, and then this whole thing kind of, if you've listened to Mike Benz at all talk about Jeffrey Epstein, there's an Epstein connection to Iran Contra, which then connects this whole thing. So it's like this is like some crazy, I understand how crazy this kind of sounds, but as you keep kind of going down these little rabbit holes and finding these little crumbs, there's no way to prove any of this. Just like there's no way to prove that Terry Nichols ever met what's his name, the Ramzi Youssef, even though they both overlapped in their time in the Philippines. The Philippines is a huge country, a huge network of islands. There's no way to ever put them in the same room at the same time. But the idea that Ramzi Youssef is the mastermind of making the bomb or getting the bomb, trying to take down the World Trade Centers in 1993 with a truck bomb. And then in 1995, Terry Nichols is part of a plot to make a truck bomb, which did what it was intended to do, as horrific as it is just something that I don't think can be overlooked. That's just kind of like, I don't, because from what I understand, neither Terry Nichols nor Tim McVeigh had the capacity mentally to design and build the bomb that they built. I don't know, maybe you figured out more on that end of like maybe someone showed them, but from what I understand, neither of them had the technical capabilities to build the bomb that they built.
That's my understanding too. I know there was like a cook who was involved with probably building the bomb. He's some meth cook who was actually like a PhD chemist from almost like a Breaking Bad story, like just another
Right.
wild character who he went to UCLA, got a chemistry degree, and then kind of crashes out and winds up in Kingman, Arizona, like cooking meth and living out of a trailer. Man, his name's escaping me, but he was reported as a possible suspect early on. So just another wild character, and that's really why this story is so compelling to me. I mean, you always want to be respectful to the victims and their families, but it's really just the most interesting story in like modern American history, in my opinion, for the same reason that people are so interested in the Epstein stuff because of all the billionaires and celebrities and politicians. Well, with Oklahoma City, you just have this wide network of undercover FBI agents and spooks and neo-Nazi bank robbers, Iraq war veterans, Vietnam veterans, and it's just endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, and it's I would encourage but also discourage anyone from diving down the rabbit hole, because it will take up a lot of your time. It will tickle your, like, kind of conspiratorial funny bone. I will just tell you this: do not mention it at Thanksgiving to your loved ones, because they will look at you sideways. And I've had that happen, where, I'm not just bringing it up randomly, but it's still like, like, what are you even talking about? I guess there was also, I think you retweeted this, or you might have been the one that tweeted it, that I forget her name, but she just filed a lawsuit about the appendage that was found, the arm, the leg, I can't remember what, of trying to filed a lawsuit against the government about this arm that was found in OKC. Does that sound right?
The missing leg, yeah. I
The
had
missing leg, excuse me.
the pleasure
Yes.
of breaking that story yesterday. In fact, she just filed a lawsuit 31 years later. Basically, there was a missing leg that was found in the rubble that they weren't able to match it with the body. And this has been the subject of controversy for over 30 years. They eventually matched it to an Air Force veteran named Lakeisha Levy, of this black lady who's working at Tinker Air Force Base. And they said, well, this is her leg. But then when they exhumed Levy's body, she was already buried with another leg. So the question is, well, whose leg does that belong to? And so 31 years later, Kathy Sanders, who lost her two grandchildren in the blast, she's been investigating this, for the last 3 decades. and she's just lawyered up, and she's actually suing for records on both the leg that was matched to Levy and then the leg that was exhumed when they dug her body back up. And the thought is that this leg might belong to an additional co-conspirator, possibly even John Doe too. If you imagine, pure speculation, but let's use our imaginations here. John Doe 2 is an undercover agent. He was riding with McVeigh, and at the last second, McVeigh pulls a gun on him, like, I know you're an agent, we're doing this, ignites the fuse to set off the bomb. John Doe 2, the undercover agent, goes out back, opens up the door to try to defuse the bomb, and then it goes off, and his leg is not incinerated immediately because it was like below, the where you would step up onto the truck. Maybe the leg was somehow protected. This is all on surveillance footage, and they're trying to cover it up. But maybe that's who the leg belongs to. Just a theory, but it's an interesting one, I think.
Well, and it'd be nice to figure out whose leg it is. But so there is surveillance footage of the bomb going off.
And this is what Jesse Trentadue has been fighting for about 20 years. We've got numerous FBI memos and even Secret Service records referencing this surveillance footage, but then the government claims that, oh, we don't have any. So Jesse has been fighting a FOIA battle for almost 20 years to get this surveillance footage. Pretty much, usually when you file a FOIA lawsuit with the FBI will tell the judge, oh, we don't have the records, and that's that. The judge will throw out the case. But Jesse's been able to stretch this out for so long because he's presented records saying, well, this says that the footage exists. And the judge, to his credit, hasn't just thrown out the case. It went to trial in 2014, and then there was allegations of witness tampering. Jesse was going to have an FBI informant who was monitoring McVeigh testify at the trial. The informant backed out at the last minute. And now for the last 12 years now, the courts have been investigating these witness tampering allegations. And it's really it's a landmark trial that's still going on. In fact, if you look behind me, right above my head, is the first story I wrote on OKC, and it's all about this long case. That's Jesse Trentadue right there. And so I framed the story because it was like the first one I did on OKC. So people, check that out if they want. It's for the Epoch Times. If they search Jesse Trentadue, that should pop up.
Heck yeah. So my biggest question, and you may have seen the tweet, which I've asked this numerous times. I cannot understand for the life of me how bomb goes off. Less than 24 hours later, they know what the vehicle was. They know that I can understand where they thought it was a truck bomb. I think they pretty much thought it was a truck bomb from the word go. Just the damage, the hole in the ground, all of that. Fair enough. They find this rear axle a block away that smashes on a car. Somebody calls in, says there's an axle, and they divert resources to go look at this axle. They then somehow magically know, yep, this is the axle, and an OKC PD officer, like he was a car theft guy or whatever. Like, he had some specialization. It just wasn't a beat cop. Gets the last 8 of the serial number, somehow finds out it's, calls Ford or whomever, finds out that it's a rental for the Ryder Truck Company, who then tells him it was rented out of this, and they have a name, and then they go and they get the description and all of that. No one can ever tell me how, without surveillance footage, which allegedly doesn't exist, how they knew, one, you were really looking for a truck bomb. But if we take it at face value, they just knew it so well. They knew they were looking for a truck bomb. How would you possibly know that this is the axle? And how would you think that the axle survived a 4,000, 5,000, 7,500? They still haven't figured out how big the bomb was. And then Tim McVeigh told them it was like 5,000. So that's the number they went with. Pound bomb that went off, killing 168 people, most of which were like children or whatnot, and made this huge hole in the ground. But for a fact that this is the axle. Even if you had surveillance footage, I keep trying to make this point to people. Even if you had surveillance footage, this is 1995. This is literally closed circuit television. This is lines that are going to a VHS somewhere that take magnetic tape, that someone has to take the tape, put it in another VCR and look at and manually look through it. Now, you can speed it up and slow it down, but you have to manually, physically look through this footage. How, within less than 48 hours, they basically have John Doe number 1 and John Doe number 2 that they're looking for, all from this rear axle that magically fell out of the sky a block and a half away. Mind you, this is the same guy who got the information off this axle, the same guy who's looking through the rubble and calls out a false alarm of a tow missile in the rubble. I don't know your thoughts on that. Like, how could you know that without knowing that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I think the only explanation is they had to have had surveillance footage showing the blast. You even then, the quick timing of it, really raises a lot of questions. And I think the best explanation is like they knew it because this was a sting operation that went awry, so they
Right.
know exactly what they were looking for. Yeah, you went into it, but briefly, yeah, they tracked down the serial number on the axle to the company who manufactured it, track it down to the people who rented it out, and then they used the description of the people who rented the truck to make those notorious sketches of John Doe 1 and John Doe 2. And I believe after the sketches were published on the media, it was like McVeigh's coworker in Buffalo called the cops and said, well, hey, that looks a lot like McVeigh, this guy I work with. And then it just so happens that they searched for McVeigh, and he had been incarcerated on a gun charge when he was pulled over for speeding right after the attack. He had a concealed carry that he didn't have a permit for, so they take him to jail for that. And then he's just sitting there to be plucked up by the feds. Very convenient.
It Yeah, again, I agree. They had to have some inside knowledge on this whole thing. I went back and looked at some of the original news reporting at the time, and they were looking for like Arab men who might have used a truck bomb, and it's like, that's interesting. I don't know what that is. That could just be speculation of the local cops. Someone could have heard that. The local news around here wasn't very good then. It's not very good now. So that's kind of, I guess, neither here nor there, but it's very, to me, it's very obvious that they knew way more than they've ever let on about this plot, about this bombing. And it kind of would make sense if you knew it and it happened under your nose, but this is kind of that hubris that gets the best of them. Like, we're going to let these little puppies go and we can watch them, and they're just little puppies. It's no big deal. Well, I've got a thumb on them. We know where they're at. And that's exactly like how 9/11 happened. These guys were allowed in the country because they were kind of working for us. It's the same thing. Like, these are going to lead us to this bigger fish. These guns, we're going to let them go across the border, and then we're going to track where they went, and we'll get the kingpins or whatever. And it keeps constantly kind of backfiring on them, but they keep doing it anyway. Speaking of backfire, there's an Iran connection or not. That's one of those things that probably need to kind of to touch on before we end this, about the Iran connection to the Trump attempted assassination.
Yeah, that's important to touch on for sure, because even if you don't like Trump, even if you don't care about the conspiracy theories surrounding about Butler, the assassination stuff has been used as a reason for going to war right now. When we started the war in February, Trump said, we assassinate their Ayatollah. He says, well, I got him before he got me. Pete Hegseth said, Trump had the last laugh. Really using the excuse that Iran was trying to kill Trump as one of the reasons to go to war. Arguably, we might be at war anyways, but they've
Sure.
floated it out there, so it's worth knocking down. And there's a lot of rumors in 2024 that Iran was connected to Butler. It's pretty baseless. There was a guy who was arrested on July 12th, the day before Butler, who was charged with working for Iran in a plot to kill politicians, including possibly Trump. But when you look at this case, it was one of those highly controlled FBI sting operations where, unlike OKC, they're closely tracking him every step of the way. They let him into the country on purpose. They run an informant at him. The informant introduces them to two undercover FBI agents who are posing as hitmen. They talk about a plot. He makes like a $500 down payment, and then they arrest him when he's leaving the country. And now most people say this is like the most legitimate threat to Trump. This is evidence that Iran really did try to kill him, but it's totally ridiculous. Even if the guy really wanted to do it, he didn't speak English, didn't have any weapons, didn't have any money, didn't have a car. It was totally manufactured by the FBI. That's one of like about up now like 4 different Iranian conspiracies, but it really seems
Right.
like certain people are trying to convince Trump that Iran's trying to kill him. Maybe it's in their interest for Trump to be mad at Iran.
It would serve other interests for sure. And I look at it like this: if you're Iran, the dumbest thing you can do is assassinate the president, because this is already a very unpopular. It's never been popular to go to war with Iran ever. It's whether it was the military circles or the public circles. No one wants to go to war with Iran. We're kind of tolerating this limited engagement, but the idea that we want to ground invasion or escalate the war in any fashion is just, there's no appetite for that unless you take out the president and then it's full scale. So it's not in Iran's interest to take out Donald Trump. It could be in some other countries' interest, but it's not in Iran's interest if they want to survive this. And everything I've seen from Iran thus far in this war is they are wanting to survive this. They've shown some restraint in a lot of capacity. So um, it just doesn't ever make sense. But that doesn't mean that people aren't going to float that out there and act like someone had something to do with it or they wanted to. It's kind of the greater conspiracy of the whole thing, and the cover up continues to this day of Butler, among other things, OKC, what have you. But Ken, I appreciate you coming on, hanging out on this Friday night, and you could have been out there at the honky tonks doing anything. I appreciate the time. I'll put the links in the description of where people can find you, where they can purchase your book. It's a great book. Just the pages I've read, it's very in depth, very knowledgeable. As everybody heard, he knows what he's talking about. I'll give you the last word here, man.
Oh no, this is really great. This I when you said, I think I saw online that you were talking about you were doing a deep dive on OKC. I didn't know you really know your stuff, so it was really fun talking to you, and happy to do it anytime.
I appreciate that, man. And for everybody who is watching, hanging out, we appreciate it. And everybody who listens in the future, thank you very much. And until next time, everybody take care and peace.